Hello everyone and welcome back to the Great Book of Grudges. My name is Nathan, and since we have all the start positions for the Chaos Dwarfs in Immortal Empires, I want to talk about a few things, because if you didn't notice, there's a lot of blank spaces which could help us determine where future DLC might go. So yeah, this is something that we're going to look at into the future. I only wanted to briefly mention it now because I have had a few conversations with some fans of the series, with some other content creators too, and we all kind of thought this is probably where things are going to go next. Obviously, everyone could be wrong because Creative Assembly do have plans, or so they state, for multiple DLCs for years to come. But, I don't know, it seems very, very empty in certain locations. I mean, isn't it weird that we finally have the Chaos Dwarf DLC, yet the Darklands and a little bit of the Mountains of Mourn is pretty empty? Of course, there's other locations in other parts of the world, but it's very noticeable there, especially since the soon-to-be-released DLC is centered around this content. So, I mean, it's very obvious of what we can expect there in the future, not necessarily going into Lord Pack of this versus this, but more so, what can we expect? Obviously, Neferata is a character that we're expecting, and we know that she hangs around these areas. Her faction's actually in-game now, so yeah, this is a first one. Now, it would be great if we saw her this year, we don't know. It could be that they're going to focus with Kislev and Cafe, Kislev versus maybe Norska for a Norska rework, and Cafe versus Zinch for the Monkey King versus someone, but still, in the future, it's almost certain we can expect Neferata there, which would be for an interesting campaign, as you're pretty much surrounded by a lot of enemy factions. You will have, obviously, Vlad very close to you, but I don't think that she wants to be near her ex-husband. Yes, they were married in law. The Mountains of Mourn are relatively empty. They're not really a big area. It's actually quite fast to traverse there if you just go pretty much in a straight line. Well, you know, with the mountain passes and so on. But I still imagine that something could fit there. You see, there is a dwarf minor faction near Firemouth, and it kind of makes sense to have in a dwarf faction there, as right now the dwarf factions are very separated, right? We've got, you know, Fogrim and Ungrim quite close to each other, but the rest of the dwarf factions do separate quite nicely. We do know that there is a Dwarven Karak as a minor faction in the Mountains of Mourn, and it would be pretty interesting to have another faction which is further away from the rest of the possible allies, just fighting something completely different. You never know when the dwarfs get their third and hopefully final rework. Yeah, you know, you'd be surrounded by ogres, which will give you large targets to fight with. Might be kind of interesting. You'd have the Chaos Dwarfs to fight on the left, but then again, you would already be used to that as playing with Fogrim or Ungrim. And then to the right, you'd be dealing with Grand Cafe and anything around that. A lot of Chaos concentration very early on too, which could be quite interesting considering that, you know, you'd be dealing with Kolek coming down, probably Zatan moving down there, any other Chaos factions. Grimgol would be an issue too. So many things to fight. I feel like if they're going to do a proper Slayer-themed DLC in the future, or well, maybe even just an Engineers Guild or a mixed theme, this would be a great place to do so. Now, we can imagine a Nurgle character being in the northern parts of the world eventually, as what we do know is that they do have plans for a Nurgle character. In the Ask Me Anything that they did a few days ago, they do say there, it's like, when we do add another Nurgle character. So, yeah, this is likely going to be Temakon, because it just makes sense, and in a very previous statements, this was like months ago, they said that it doesn't mean that they won't add in mortal characters to the monogod factions. So, I mean, it just makes sense to add in Temakon, and also, you know, the whole Temakon versus Elsef thing that everyone's been asking for is just too good to pass up. It's one of the best matchups that were ever released in Warhammer Fantasy. The thing is, you could easily put him into the Darklands, because it just kind of makes sense, as in a certain part of the story, he does go through the Darklands, recruit some Chaos Dwarfs before heading down in the weirdest way to actually get to Null. Rather than actually just cutting straight through, he goes down, basically goes in through the Badlands. It's a pretty weird thing. However, if they want to start it off from the beginning of the story, it would make sense to put him in Kadafa, as that place is very close to Zanbaijin, and it just kind of makes sense from a story progression. Start there, then go through the trials of Temakon. It is very close to Archaon and Kolek, unfortunately, but really, since we saw Zatan being close to Kolek already, and we already have a bunch of characters which are neighboring each other, it just kind of makes sense that start him in a lore-friendly position. I will say one thing, the way that things are being added it in, it shows that eventually, if things continue to go this well, we're just going to get a lot of DLCs and the map is going to be fully congested in a good way, because that means, yeah, you're going to be fighting a Legendary Lord faction constantly, and hopefully it's spread out and we're seeing loads of different factions. Yeah, I mean, it makes a lot of sense for Tamacon to be in both locations. I prefer the North. Different players and obviously Creative Assembly, when they actually do implement this, might think otherwise. Now, yes, there's loads of other places that are pretty empty. Cafe is obviously empty, but we're expecting, you know, the big dragons are. Lustria is very empty, though I would say that I would not like to see other Lizardmen factions there. If we do get, say, for example, Tetueco or another Slan character would be cool, they'd have to be someplace else, because it's a lot of Lizardmen already in Lustria, and that would just get totally boring. It does make sense from a lore perspective, but it also has to be fun factor more than anything else. The Northern Chaos Waste is likely going to be demon factions, let's be very honest here. Anything else that gets added there is likely going to be demon, because we've got the main demons in the south of the world, so it makes sense to add in more demon factions in the north. We already discussed that with Tamacon, but it just makes sense with the others too. Obviously, we did miss out one part of the Darklands. Technically, it's not part of the Darklands, but it is too. Nagash is right on the border there, which makes sense for Nagash in the future, as we're kind of expecting him. It just makes a lot of sense to implement him in the future, considering that he's a very big character, and loads of people have been asking about it. That will be a DLC that will sell tremendously well. Makes me worry about poor Imrik, but considering that Imrik is very hyper-aggressive recently, maybe he deserves this, right? But yeah, obviously that's a character there. You can tell that there is a lot of blank spaces around these locations. There could even be like an orc character in the future or something else, considering that still, even with what we've talked about, there is still a decent amount of blank spaces within the areas of the Darklands. Now, before anyone takes this the wrong way, I'm not saying that DLC should be focused around this area. I'm just saying that it's very obvious that we do have spaces here for future content. There should be a bit of a mix-up, and they should really be spreading it out as much as possible. I think that's actually why they decided to move Zatan a little bit, as it does make sense to have some variety with the Chaos Dwarfs. Now, even though they're very close to each other, you can have 3 completely different campaigns, as you have 3 different sets of enemies. With Drizhof, you can go directly down south into the Southlands. With Zatan, you can basically fight your way into the Mountains of Mourn and Grand Cafe. And then with Astrogath, you can go into, the Norska territory, the Empire, anywhere really. But I'm curious, because blank spaces make me think about the future, and I'm actually really hopeful for the future, because it seems that in Creative Assembly's interviews and so on, you know, they seem happy, they seem optimistic about future content, and yeah, I just want to see how this goes. With all that being said, what other characters do you think would fit in the Darklands? Because obviously there is room, and even the Mountains of Mourn, I'm counting them together because, well, they're very close and they're both very, very empty. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. Let's start a bit of a discussion. But yeah, also, I've started doing some multiplayer content. You'll see that I've got a video up already, which was posted earlier today. This was Khorne versus Chorfs. The idea is it's going to be a few days until we can get the campaign stuff done. Well, showcased. My videos for campaign are already done. So I figured I'd dip my toes into multiplayer battles every now and then, especially since a few of you actually asked for it, just like telling me that I should really try it out, I should give it a proper try. So I'm taking your suggestions and doing it. Because at the end of the day, you know, you guys keep this channel going, so why not, right? But with all that being said, have a lovely day, guys, and I'll see you all again very, very soon.